Ladies and gentlemen, please let's put our hands together as I invite our Finance Minister, our Honorable Finance Minister, Mr. Arun Jaitley, to kindly come on stage. May I please request Mr. Arun Puri, Chairman, Editor-in-Chief, India Today Group, along with Raj Chingappa, Group Editorial Director, Publishing India Today Group, Prasenjit Datta, Editor, Business Today, to unveil the new ReBrain emoji. Let's have a huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. That'll be absolutely wonderful, isn't it? Thank you. ReBrain or ROT, or now called ROR. Thank you so much.
On behalf of the India Today Group, it is a pleasure to welcome Arun Jaitley, Union Minister of Finance, who, I may add, has a year to the Prime Minister. But Mr. Jaitley is more than just an important minister. He is a man with many interests and many talents. He is an outstanding lawyer. He once said, politics for him was a financial sacrifice. A lover of cricket, he still plays an influential role in the administration of the game. And he's a raconteur who can regale you with nuggets of information. Modern, moderate, and a liberal, Arun Jaitley has played a crucial role in every substantive policy measure of the current NDA government. As Union Finance Minister, he has always been the calm in the eye of the many storms that the NDA government has unleashed. He has presided over two of the biggest shock therapies to the Indian economy in recent times: the demonetization of high-value notes exactly a year ago, and more recently, the path-breaking goods and services tax, or GST. The jury may still be out over the success of these two measures, but there is no doubt that Mr. Jaitley has handled such transformative reforms with rare aplomb. His ministry, and that's why he is here today, has done more to harness technology and governance than any other. Arun Jaitley, in fact, leads the digital charge of this government. Arun, may I now invite you to deliver your keynote address on the subject. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Raj, and thank you very much, India Today, for having invited me for this conference. Let me just make one correction. I don't lead the charge as far as the digital initiative of the government is concerned. But of course, I do have a large number of responsibilities which directly impinge upon them. Obviously, nobody can defy technology. On the contrary, wisdom will always prevail that you have to use it as an effective tool itself. And one illustration that immediately comes to my mind is that last week, when the World Bank released the Ease of Doing Business report, and I was analyzing where we've done well and where is it that we still have a lot of distance to cover. Really, the difference in a large measure came from the factors where we've been effectively able to use technology. Our largest jump, for instance, was in the area of taxation. We moved up 53 positions. And we moved up 53 positions even without the GST having been taken into consideration. The cutoff date for the World Bank is the 1st of June. The GST came on the 1st of July. And before they really factor in it, they see for a reasonable period of time the effect on the ground itself. So they had to look at what has happened before the 1st of June. Now here you were dealing with a department which otherwise has had a reasonably adverse image in dealing with the assessees itself. And what technology enabled in a very silent manner over the last few years was to bring about almost a disconnect between the assessing officer and the assessee. So more than 99.5% of the assessees have started filing their returns online. If there is a marginal query, it is addressed online. You get your orders online. You get either your refund or your information of the refund online, and your speed post brings you back your refund. It's only that 1% of the cases which are selected for scrutiny really need an interface. Now here we are dealing with a department which each one of us, myself included, dreaded in our lives visiting, which has an image of a department where ethical standards were lacking. And if you are able to effectively use technology in a department of this kind, the manner in which you are able to bring about efficiency, a larger accountability, complete absence of interface, and thereby you can reduce levels of corruption substantially. I think this is really a living example of what technology can do. And therefore, when we suddenly realized that we'd moved up 53 positions merely on the strength that we've used technology as an instrument of governance itself. Now take the other example where we've done extremely badly conventionally. This is areas relating to land and building permissions. Now anybody who wants to build a factory or a plant or a house or have a land transfer and has to deal at the state government level with the authorities with regard to the mutation of the lands, and then go to the municipalities and ask for change of land user and a sanction of building plan and then a completion certificate. So the questions which have been addressed to us is, how many steps does he have to take? What is the cost involved? What is the extent of harassment involved in all this? Now each one of these adds or subtracts to the doing of business in the language of the World Bank and in the language of a government. Each one of it would then reflect on poor governance. Now, in case we are able to effectively utilize technology, and that's one of the priority items we have now put in for this year, we are conscious of the challenge that this is something which has to be done at the states and has to be done at the level of the municipal bodies and even the local panchayats, that your land records are online, your applications can go online, your building permits must go online, your permissions must come online. World over this happens. Technology has enabled this. And therefore the introduction of these systems in governance, the impact that it would have on reducing the levels of corruption, reducing the levels of harassment as far as individuals is concerned, and obviously contributing to better governance itself. And therefore, when we speak in terms of technology as an important tool in governance, almost at every stage in governance, it has a very powerful role. Last week, for instance, in the expenditure department, we launched a new system. We have a large number of central sector schemes. Schemes where monies are provided by the central government, Monies then go to the state governments. From the state governments, they go to the local districts and are completely decentralized and then reach for implementation of those schemes itself. Now, this is the context in which the famous statement was made that almost 85% of the money gets pilfered before it reaches the ground. What also additionally happens is that there are demands for more money, but money is actually lying in the pipeline and is not being spent. Now, technology has enabled us to create a system where, with regard to every scheme and every rupee allocated in every scheme, you can actually trace the quantum of work, the amount of money which is being spent, the amount of money which is being lying in the pipeline, and whether more money is required to be given or not till the earlier money is spent. So the parking of money as against the actual expenditure of public funds is something which in a split second it is possible to sit in New Delhi and then detect it whether it's been happening or not. And I think this is a great enabling situation which technology has provided. Similarly, I'll give you an illustration which really is the true story of Aadhaar. The whole idea of Aadhaar as a unique identification number was conceived by Nandan during the UPA government. Now, at a time when it was conceived, there was still, the idea was clear that every Indian would have a biometric identity and a unique identity number. But it was probably still in the evolution stage as to what do you do with it. So legal challenges and questions arose even in Parliament that can you do this by an executive fiat? There is no law. So they hurriedly drafted a law. Now, while the law was being drafted, there was difference of opinions between the Home Ministry and the other concerned ministries. And the law simply said, well, there will be a unique identity number. And this is the manner in which every person will be expected to get a unique identity number. What do you do with that? Again, was not clear. So it remained a draft law. Now, I must candidly admit that a number of my friends had serious doubts about the whole idea. And at that time, the debate was also led with the factor of will non-citizens also get it? Will the illegal immigrants also get it? These are all side issues which were added to the debate. Within the first 10 or 15 days of the new government, Nandan made a presentation to the Prime Minister. I was also present. And after going through a detailed presentation, we thought it was a wonderful idea. And why should it not be linked really to all the benefits that the government gives to a citizen? Now, till that moment, if you remembered, there was this great debate going on about subsidies and how to rationalize subsidies. Subsidies were considered always a kind of an unidentified amount which could be given to an unidentified section of people. So at that moment, even you and I got the petroleum subsidy. We got the cooking gas subsidies. Because these were price-distorting subsidies where everybody, irrespective of the economic character of the user, got those subsidies. And finally, when we worked on this law, that all right, if you want a government advantage or a benefit of a subsidy, you must have your unique identity number. So we linked it with it, and the law was tailored accordingly. there were concerns of privacy, and there was a whole chapter on privacy which was brought in. Arvind Subramanian further kept improving on this idea of linking the three, the Janadhan, the Aadhaar and the mobile, and which has now given us probably a huge data bank, now which can be used for the purposes of taxation, which can be used for the purposes of a lot of other activities. The immediate advantage is you can exclude categories from benefits, those who are not entitled to get those benefits. The exclusion is extremely easily possible. Post demonetization, a lot of people found that, you see, the moment I am able to get the money across into the banking system, perhaps I will be able to avoid a glare at myself. That was the whole idea. Now, technology again as a great enabler, the kind of data mining which has been done, you are immediately able to distinguish from the kind of deposits, one, who are the people who made deposits which are completely disproportionate to their otherwise declared incomes, and 1.8 million people in the first round itself got identified. Chartered accountants in this country for decades had worked out a standard operating procedure of having shell companies registered in Calcutta, and through a process of round tripping you could convert funds. Now with the kind of technology enabling instruments that you have even in the registrar of companies sites, I think even for investigative reporters in your media organizations, it's no longer rocket science. It's a matter of minutes before they are able to unravel the multi-layering and find out who the real person behind those companies is. And therefore, even in this exercise, to unravel them and find out which are the shell companies which have been used for this kind of an exercise has become extremely easy. And you've been able to find the relevant answers to this. I think effectively, therefore, for the purposes of effective good governance, rather than just rely on anecdotal evidence, data gives you a more correct analysis. And therefore, technology for that purpose, I think, becomes probably one of the most powerful tools in governance. And that's what I experienced over the last few years has been. And I'm quite sure that this is a trend. It's picked up very well in the states. The revenue departments have done it. The land departments in the states are doing it. And it's a gradual movement across the country which is now taking place.
Thank you, Arun. Thank you, Arun. Let's give him a warm round of applause for this tremendous sweep of how technology can help governance. Arun has very kindly agreed to take a few questions, and I'm going to ask the first one, which is on the top of everybody's mind. Tomorrow, as you know, we'll be celebrating the anniversary of demonetization. Your critics say it was a disaster. The government says it was an outstanding success. The aim, of course, was to bring down black money or curtail it completely. What is, in your opinion, the success in this particular mission?
If you look back, I think a step like demonetization, and if you link it to various steps that the government has taken in the last 3 to 4 years, I think we've succeeded in really bringing to the center stage the whole issue of how financial transactions in India really ought to be carried out. a high cash-dominated society with all the aberrations which excessive cash has, should a country which aspires to become a developed country or which claims to be the fastest growing amongst the major economies in the world survive on that? If we honestly search ourselves and ask a question, was it possible to buy a real estate in India without paying part of the consideration in cash? Weren't a very large number of businesses in India maintaining 2 sets of account books? Haven't we reached a stage in India where it was a way of life not to pay taxes or not to pay proper taxes itself? Now, do we allow this status quo to continue, or do you set in reverse a process where India realizes that developed nations or aspirational nations have to behave differently? And therefore, I think what Prime Minister Modi did was, not only with the demonetization, but also with a large number of other steps that he led the country into, the 3 or 4 immediate advantages that we got was, does India need to shrink the quantum of its cash currency? The answer is yes, and that process has begun. The first year itself has seen a shrinkage. 2, will India's tax base increase? Are those discussions only meant for the budget day evening, that we need to increase the tax GDP ratio, and throughout the year, every time you take a step, you just make a critical comment on it? No, we are very happy dealing in cash. And therefore, this is one step where the number of people filing returns is actually going up. And this is in the individual segment. I'm not talking of the corporate segment itself. Are the number of digital transactions going up? Look at the kind of debate which is taking place in the whole banking system and the fintech industry now. It was only credit cards or debit cards or your Bheem apps or your various forms of money transfers which are now taking place. You nudged the process for greater tax compliances, you've nudged the process for greater digitalization and for shrinking currencies. Take advantages like more monies coming officially into the stock market. Direct impact. More money is coming into the life insurances. The squeeze of money into the terrorist hands. Any serious analyst of the situation of the Maoists in Chhattisgarh or the insurgents in Kashmir will tell you, why is it that the stone throwers who used to come in thousands have disappeared? Because those organizations didn't have that liquid cash left anymore. In fact, some of the security experts link the effort to have the raids on the banks with the inadequacy of cash available with them. Some people tried to confuse this whole idea that, oh, merely because people managed to get their monies into the banking system, demonetization has not succeeded. Well, that's the real success of the demonetization. What is cash outside is laundered in the system. What is cash outside can be laundered because it's anonymous. The moment the anonymity is lost, when you deposit it in your name in a bank account, then you have to account for it and probably pay tax for it. And therefore, these large amounts of current account and saving account deposits that the banks have got become a part of the of something which is now a more legitimate money. And I think we've started a process in year 1, and if you link it, don't take it in isolation, link it with all the other steps, the spending curbs on cash, the ultimate impact of the GST in ability not to be able to generate cash, the whole thrust on this disclosures, both nationally and internationally, which has been coming, the thrust against Benami properties. So if you link it, I think the kind of steps which have been taken, there's going to be a sea change on account of these steps in the manner in which India spends its money.
I think the question is at what cost? And your predecessor, Mr. Chidambaram, said that it was like burning the entire house down for a mosquito.
You see, let's come to the cost itself. Ultimately, every structural reform will have some consequences. And structural reforms in the long run help the economy. And if you don't have the capacity or the courage or the broad shoulders to undertake those structural reforms, then of course that status quo would have continued. And the status quo ante which existed in India, I don't think is an ideal situation what India would have lived to be. At the end of the day, if a major structural reform can cost you a step back for a quarter or two, then is it too big a price for India to pay not to undertake a structural reform? This year at the IMF World Bank meetings, the buzzword which was being used because they saw the global economy move up, which was being repeated from the dais, was that it's only when the sun is shining that you repair the roof. And therefore, if you were 3 years in a row a fast-moving global economy, that's the time when you had the opportunity to take structural reforms. Otherwise, the only option to structural reforms that my predecessor can give you is the policy paralysis. Well, that's not my choice.
What about the loss of jobs and the drop in the GDP?
You see, if you look at the drop in the GDP, from March around 7.9% or so, 16, for 2 to 3 quarters, the GDP had been slightly slipping. This is before the demonetization itself. And that slippage had nothing to do with the demonetization. That had more to do with another factor. We had a large public investment. We had a large foreign direct investment. But we had inadequate private investment because we had also inadequate support from the banking system. The Reserve Bank itself had imposed very tight provisioning norms on the banks because of the kind of legacy problems which were left behind as far as the banks were concerned. Now, this problem is there. Now, the remonetization which was done in India was almost immediate. It was a very quick remonetization which was done. Of course, the quantum of high denominational currency was squeezed by the Reserve Bank a little bit. And therefore, you had some impact for a quarter or so. Subsequently, if you saw, the impact is not so much of the demonetization, but when on the 1st of July, we had announced the GST date. If you critically analyze the GST, the data, in that quarter, the services went up to 8.7%, but it's the manufacturing which came down. So people were buying. Demonetization hadn't had any impact. They had the money to buy. They even bought goods from abroad because the current account deficit moved up a little to 2.4. So people were buying. The services moved up. But they were destocking the existing stocks because they wanted to now manufacture under the new tax regime itself. So these are at least 2 significant structural reforms back to back with each other. And I'm quite sure that both of them are now behind us.
No, particularly the loss of jobs, and there's some estimates 1.5 million jobs had dropped.
You see, these are, I'll tell you, a lot of this is anecdotal. because I saw a lot of your television programs even during that period. Well, the sale is down to 10% or 20%, etc. But finally, when the 6.1% growth GDP figure came, which is low by our standards, but not a terrible one, it didn't seem to be indicating those figures. And therefore, rather than go by anecdotal evidence which becomes more gossipy, one has to go by the real figures itself.
And they show the real figures?
Well, I think let's wait, because having undertaken two major structural changes, which are extremely important for Indian economy, I think the impact being substantially behind us, the early indications for the future look to be positive.
I am going to open this out to questions. I see some hands. Arun, you had a question that was quite interesting before when we met Arun Jaitley. Arun Puri, Editor-in-Chief, would you like to ask the question about about the future of black money? I thought that was very interesting. Arun?
My question, Mr. Jaitley, was regarding you stopped the supply of black money, but not necessarily the demand for black money. So the generation of new black money will probably start all over again, or has already started. So what are the steps the government needs to take in order to follow through from demonetization so that new black money is not generated? You know the kind of people who are asking for black money, so that hasn't stopped. In fact, the price has gone up because the threat is more.
See, let's be clear, one is not in a position today to talk about a society where there is no cash. You are at best aiming for a society where there is less cash. And therefore, in terms of governance, you have to really look at areas where government's interface with citizens minimizes itself. In fact, one of the great sources of corruptions is either discretions, which are vested in authority. And if I have a discretion to decide whether to favor A or B, it can lead to corruption. Or B, if I deal with too many people and I'm in a position to show favor to some of them or otherwise. And I think it's here that technology itself plays a very important role. What happened ultimately in the allocation of natural resources? So how did corruption disappear in the coal allocations and in the mine allocation and in the spectrum allocation? Because rather than go to the ministers, you had to go and address the software on your laptop as to what bid you are going to make. So if you are going to use all these effective tools, I think governance then can become far more objective and reduce certainly levels of corruption in a society.
Rajiv Dubey, who is our managing editor for TV Today on business.
Mr. Jaitley, yesterday Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad was here and he was mentioning that there is an amount of 3.68 lakh crore that is under investigation. The earlier amount that we had heard was 2.89 lakh crore. Now, when do we see the tangible numbers of how much black money has been discovered or is likely to be discovered?
I'll tell you, this will be a continuous process. Let's not tie ourselves down to a number. For the simple reason, you have, for instance, amongst the individuals who made deposits, the CBDT has been able to identify 1.8 million people. Then from the shell companies, we've been able to identify a large number of these shell companies itself, which have been used as conduits. Now, ultimately, tax assessments is a quasi-judicial process. There are appeals, etc. And therefore, on a given day to say that this is the number, now what is the sustainable number at the end of the day, it will keep on varying. So I think it's more the process and the fact that you've nudged the situation that today one message in India which is going home loud and clear, it's no longer safe to deal so much in cash. And therefore, it's only proper, fair and ethical to deal in a cleaner money. I think that's been a great achievement of the last 1 year. I'd rather look at it this way.
Shweta Punj, and then Rahul Kanwar.
Mr. Jaitley, what's been the government's assessment of the impact on the informal sector, since there is very little data available to really analyze the impact and we just have anecdotal evidence? How's the government reading into the situation, and are there any measures that you're thinking of to really ease the pain?
You see, one has to, as far as the demonetization impact is concerned, any form of a disruption like this can have an immediate impact. But that immediate impact gets rectified if you come out with a prompt remonetization. The period was not years. The remonetization period was weeks. And therefore, if the impact has been so huge, then the kind of social unrest it would have thrown up itself would have been evident. Now, why didn't you see incidents of this kind? Because it was followed by an immediate process of remonetization itself. And mind you, we were earlier being told at one stage the impact on agriculture, because rural economy itself would be impacted. And that was the quarter in which the agriculture production actually went up.
Last question, Rahul Kanwar.
Mr. Jaitley, I was in Gujarat last week chatting with some traders in Ahmedabad about how GST was playing out for them. And one of the feedbacks that I picked up was that their sense was that the tax structure on a lot of products, and they mentioned furniture or batteries as an example, was so high, being 28%, that people didn't necessarily make the behavior change. You spoke earlier of changing people's behavior. People still prefer to pay in tax, not pay in cash, not necessarily get a bill, and stay outside the tax system. Where do you see this 28% tax structure stay? How many items will be in it? And can this change in the GST Council meeting?
I'm glad you asked this question. You see, when the GST Council fixed the rates initially, it was guided by two principles. The first was, let's stick to equivalence. What were you paying earlier? And the second was revenue neutrality, that you don't lose money so that you have enough money for governance in the states and the center. Now, for the purposes of equivalence, one factor one has to bear in mind is that in the old regime, you were paying central excise, which was never separately mentioned, because it was an embedded tax which was included in the cost. So the product didn't show that you are paying so much excise. Now it's a more transparent tax, so it's shown. Now, if you looked at the standard rates of central excise and VAT, the standard rates on a number of products under the old regime was 12.5% plus 14.5%, which is 27, plus 2% CST, if it is interstate, plus a cascading effect which took it to 31%. So that is how this 28% was born. Now, when we started going through the item of 28%, we found that a lot of items with the old regime which we were charging in this manner, and this was going through because excise was never mentioned. So there was an element of deception as far as the consumer was concerned. He never realized he was paying the tax. That some of the items really should never have been in the 28% category. So in each of the last 3 to 4 meetings, about 20 to 30 items every time we bring down from 28 to 18 or 12, and we've been gradually bringing them down. The whole idea is that as your revenue collections neutralize, we must prune it. And that's the pattern on which the council has so far been functioning. And I see that as a future guide as far as the council is concerned.
I think, Arun, one of the questions that people are concerned about is, we've seen a decline in the GDP in the last 3 quarters. Do you think that we're going to see an improvement in the next couple of quarters? What is your sense of the way the economy is doing?
You see, the indications seem to be if you see the last 2-3 months, the PMIs have been positive, the IIP growth has been positive, the core sector growth has been positive, and these are some of the early indications. And therefore, these indications probably point to an improved situation.
And I know this is a retrospective question. If you had to do demonetization again, would you have done it at the timing you chose to do, back to back with GST? Was it the best time to do it?
Well, I don't know. It's a question of decision at that particular time. Because once you go through an experience, then you always keep analyzing to yourself, how could you have done it still better?
Okay. Thank you very much, Arun Jaitley, for this. Let's give him really a warm round of applause. Thank you so much for your time and patience. Thank you.